We've coined a new term, Vaporworms, but really it's fileless malware will proliferate using worm-like self-propagation.
Yeah. Should you start by explaining fileless malware? I assume a lot of our listeners know, but just in case.
Yeah. So traditional malware, like the virus or Trojans you might be familiar with, drops a file on your computer, and that's what it executes from.
Its goal is to be persistent.
Exactly.
And really that file's about the persistence, right?
And that file allows some AV engines easier chances of catching it because they'll scan the hard drive and look for anything that looks potentially malicious, and they can catch it that way.
And they can also look for it's not just about putting the file there, but it's putting the links, whether that be a registry entry, whether it be some cron job, something that will consistently start that file every time the computer resets its state.
These days, though, the bad guys are getting better at masking their presence, and they're using techniques called fileless malware. So in this case, instead of dropping a file on the system and then executing it, they inject directly into memory, usually by exploiting a vulnerability or some vulnerable software, and then execute from memory. So at no point in time is there a file on your computer, which completely negates some protections entirely.
Yep.
And so instead, you have to use things like advanced malware services that look at processes behaviors. And they look for...
Or scan memory directly, looking for indicators there.
Exactly. And a lot of times they start with a legitimate process that spawns off this malicious activity. So you have to be watching even legitimate processes too.
And following kind of the process chain of, iExplorer launched this process, which launched this process, and oh wait, that's bad. So really it was IE that started that whole chain.
And fileless malware has been on the uptick over the last few years. I'm going to butcher the percentage, but it was somewhere between like a quarter and a third of all attacks used fileless malware.
I don't have the numbers exactly right, but Poneman Research did something on the state of the endpoint security. I think in 2015, it was somewhere in the low 20%. It went to something like the higher 20% in 2016, and 2017 was all the way up to like 35%.
Yeah. And even more frightening, though, the percentage of successful cyber attacks, according to that same study, it was like 60 or 70% of them used fileless malware. So
meaning it's better for hackers.
Yep.
Yeah.
And so our prediction is that next year we're going to start seeing the next evolution of this fileless malware, where instead of using an exploit kit or something that the user has to interact with in order to infect the vulnerable system, it'll spread automatically, much like WannaCry did. Where they might have some network vulnerability that it exploits, looks for vulnerable systems, and continues proliferating across the internet.
So it's kind of an extension of in a different way. Last year, we had the first ransomware. Ransomware was very effective, and we said, now it's going to add worm automatic spread capability. Same thing, but more along the lines of fileless malware.
Yeah.
And I love the name, by the way, Vaporworms. Scary as heck.
But I mean, we mentioned that it really hit with WannaCry first with this worm evolution for ransomware. And that was fueled by a nation state leak, the Eternal Blue vulnerabilities.
Yeah.
And so we're probably going to need another major vulnerability discovered or leaked, which, I mean, it seems like we get one every single day almost.
Yeah,
so,
definitely.
Something will come along and allow this fileless malware to spread much more easily.
On the flip side, I will say there's kind of two ways that fileless malware starts. One, you said the most truly fileless technique is a software exploit. In this case, a 0-day that you're mentioning, that once you have code execution, that's the launching point for fileless infection. However, there's another way fileless malware spreads pretty regularly, which is kind of ironic because it's not really fileless at the beginning. And that's Word document. That's usually documents. So there is a file that kind of acts as a dropper, but rather than that dropper downloading something that it puts on the computer, it just kind of starts a script,
like a
usually
PowerShell
script. And that PowerShell is now at that point, it doesn't matter if the document exists anymore. You could delete that document. In fact, I bet you a lot of them delete that document to avoid detection. And then it is purely fileless. So there could be non-0-day means to still do a Vaporworm if
like
you really
the
wanted
old school
to.
worms of a Word doc that infects and uses Outlook to send to your top 50 contacts and then, like, automatically infects them that way.
Yeah, or it's just PowerShell. It still needs some sort of 0-day to do the internal spreading automatically, but it doesn't need the 0-day to start the initial infection.
Yeah.
So it could be many ways. Either way, I think fileless is blowing up, so it's only a matter of time before we have a fileless threat that actually does have worm capability.
So defensive tips for this one, we already highlighted a few of them, and really it revolves around tools that can look at malicious or processes and watch their behavior and look for any potentially malicious activity.
Yeah, and the closest we have here at WatchGuard is something called threat detection and response. It's kind of we have a host sensor that you install, plus it monitors your network activity. But it's not AV. It's not there trying to prevent malware from executing. Rather, it's kind of this post-execution detection where it does look at files, it does look at registry entries, but more specifically, it looks at processes and process behaviors, especially for ransomware. But some of the behaviors could be similar for other malware as well. So by paying attention to the processes, you have a better chance of catching fileless malware.
Yeah,